how do we restore our connection with nature? Because I think that part of the crisis that we're in, especially with the climate, stems from the fact that we've been disconnected from our relationship to nature. And so how do we restore that? How do we get back in touch with non-human beings? With these trees in front of us here, we're standing in High Park, and with the trees and with the waters and the lakes, whatever natural environment we're in, how do we and how can we, and is it even possible, I guess the question could be, to establish some sort of relationship, which is obviously going to be different than a human relationship, and how can that connection ultimately impact the way that we choose to organize our societies and choose to live.
Episode 222. My conversation with composer, sound healer, and performance artist Wendalyn Bartley. I first met Wend when we were both doing a master's degree in composition in the 1980s at McGill University. And I was happy to reconnect with her work that explores the human voice and its relation to rituals, the sacred, spirituality, ancestors, and so on. Our conversation focused on her Buried River Sound Worlds project, a way to rediscover the natural waterways of Toronto, restoring our connection with nature.
Yeah, well, my voice work really sort of started after my studies, even though I was interested in the voice, but more, even at graduate school when we knew each other back then. That work really evolved, and when I started connecting with Richard Armstrong and Fidesz Kruger, who you introduced me to, actually, and through that connection and through that work that I did, I really found my own connection to my body, to the voice, and my voice kind of exploded one day into something I had never heard before. So I was like, okay, I got to follow this path. I got to follow this lead. Fairly early on, I was actually asked to write a string quartet piece for the Atlantic String Quartet, which was in St. John's, Newfoundland at the time. And I was sent a text written by Chief George Seattle, which asked the question, about questioning this idea of ownership. How can we own the pine trees? Like, we're standing right here in front of pine trees. How can anybody speak to the fact that, people can even own the natural world? And so it really sort of sent me on a path of wanting to find ways for myself of deepening my own relationship with the natural world.
And skipping future forward to today, just recently I heard you talk at the Canadian Association for Sound Ecology about your recent work, which I find really relevant to this issue of collapse and renewal.
Right.
Because you're talking, I think, about disappeared natural spaces, waterways,
right,
and that kind of things, and then honoring them and connecting with ancestors. So I really enjoy that work, and I'm interested to know more.
Okay. Well, actually it started, one aspect of the work I came to, because I used to live close to High Park, so I used to come here and was really curious about where the waters that we'll see. We're going to walk down now to the Grenadier Pond, which is the biggest body of water within High Park. We'll go down here. And there's a stream that flows, but where does that water come from? And so it turns out that the streams that are north of here, where all the houses are, were buried underground in a big project, which happened in most cities, where the waters that were above the ground had to be put underground, partly for sanitary reasons, because the sewers were just, there were no sewer systems, so everything was just being dumped into the waters, and it became, a site of disease, actually. But there was also this issue of convenience. Okay, this water's just in our way. We got to build roads. We got to build subways. We got to do all this stuff. So we have to put them underwater. So I was interested in where are the places where this water comes above ground? And I kind of saw that as a bit of a liminal space, a space that, was kind of in this in-between world where this water that used to flow freely down to the lake now had to be trapped, and then finally it was released. So that kind of that moment where it sees the light of day was kind of this moment of, I wanted to kind of witness that and record that. And when I would do this work, when I go to these places, which are just upstream a bit from here, I also felt like I needed to connect to the ancestral spirits of this particular land, or of any land, wherever I do this. I really try to connect with the ancestors who once lived here. And here, there's many different stories, but there's a couple different mounds that are considered to be Mohawk burial grounds. And but right now, as I was saying earlier, there's a big effort to indigenize this park and eventually limit car traffic. Well, car traffic is already being limited now, but even more so. But, yeah.
And what you talked about at the Canadian Association presentation was some of the artwork, because this podcast is interested in the role of art, and you're a singer and vocalist, and so how does that work? And could you sing for us now? Probably not, because you actually sing in an environment, right?
This is an environment.
Okay, well, go for it.
Well, could we wait until we get down to the water? Sure. I'll sing to the water.
Right.
Okay, that's okay.
That'd be great.
Yeah. So, sorry, what again was your question?
Oh, just talk about the artwork, like the kind of music that you make and how it works, and maybe an intro to what we're going to hear in a minute.
Yeah, well, I've sort of evolved practice of improvisation, vocal improvisation, inspired in part by my work with people that I've worked with from the Roy Hart School, which is a voice school in the south of France. And I've been there, and I've worked online with some of the members of the Roy Hart community. Anyway, that's really improved my improvisation, but I've been sort of doing it for many years now. And I also studied sound healing using the voice. So somehow, altogether, I've evolved this practice of vocalizing in an improvisational way. And many times I'd make recordings, but I also edit them to create something that, flows well as a composition. But I also discovered that the more I do it, the more the things that come out of me are kind of work as it's just all the years of composing music. You embody that innate sense of structure and flow and development and so on. So it ends up coming out as kind of a set composition. And I can feel it when it's happening. It's kind of like you get into a groove and you know that you're on a trajectory, and you just kind of go with it. And those are the spots in the recording that, if I'm going to develop it further as a piece of music, those are the sections that I really listen for, and okay, let's use this part, that part, whatever, and then create pathways or transitions between the parts that I gravitate towards.
And I'll put in the episode notes links to your work.
Okay.
And people can listen to it. But we'll just stop for a second here. We're both experienced sound walkers, and we're not doing a very good job.
No,
because we're mostly babbling. But that's the point, is for people to hear your ideas and what your work is like.
Right.
But I love just stopping and listening to. It's a fairly quiet place. Just your the communication or the connection with ancestors, it interests me. And so how do you do that? Is it a meditative approach, or?
Yeah, I guess I would say that it's a way of, first of all, I ground myself, feeling my body, connected to my breath and to the earth below me, and which can take a some minutes to do. And breathing helps, and gentle sounding, like just maybe humming or just low tones or something. And then just like ask. It's very simple. And I've developed this over several years now, and I have had connections with my blood ancestors. I've done some research and so on, so I know a little bit more about their stories. But I did a course once with Thomas Hubel, and he talked about going to the gate, this idea of going to the ancestral gate and just seeing who shows up, and so I would do that, and I was surprised at, people, relatives that I knew that had passed already, and I was like, you? What are you doing here? Some great uncle of mine who I barely ever spoke to, in life, he shows up, and we end up having kind of like an internal dialogue with him. So that's one thing. The other is, of course, that I did, even before I did much studying around ancestors or much delving into my own, I had this sense that I wanted to visit places in Europe, in the Mediterranean area, where there were cultures that once honored women, once honored the cycles of life, once honored the relationship with nature. And so I went to those places, and this was 20 years ago, and I made vocal recordings. It was a total experiment. I didn't even know what I was doing. I just had this idea. I wanted to go and do this and see if I could tap into ancestral memory using my voice. And so, it took a while to experiment. I didn't know, like I said, I wasn't sure what I was up to. But eventually, it started clicking, and I did feel some sort of energy coming into me, into my voice, in a similar way that I'd experienced with Richard Armstrong when I did that vocal workshop with him, when everything kind of, unfolded and opened up for me. So it was it's kind of a sensation, a bodily sensation.
Feel like doing here?
Okay, so we're standing here by the shore edges of Grenadier Pond, which is fed by Wendigo Creek, which is the creek name given to the waters that are the sources of this, that come from further north and have been put underground. They come to light at a certain spot in the park. So yeah, I'm going to do a sounding, and we'll just invoke the presence of the waters through my voice and offer whatever emerges. I'm not sure what, we'll see. We'll see what happens. So. Finding ways to cultivate your own relationship with nature. And of course, I would suggest trying with the voice, because I find it a very powerful tool. It sort of alters your own consciousness when you're doing it. Like, I always go into a different space afterwards. And if you're not a singer, you can just do humming, just simple humming. And another exercise that I like to do is just go up to a tree and find a little spot in the bark that has grooves in it, and then just make tiny sounds, and humming it would work there too, or whatever long sustained vowel sounds, like just an O or an ah sound. And just sing into the bark and see what happens, because I find that when I do that, some sort of relationship evolves. It's hard to put into words, but I feel like I've met the tree. and the tree has met me.